Kevin here with Notes on Iowa, and today we're talking about Part 1, Day 5 of my walk across Iowa in the path of the 1835 Iowa Dragoons. And on Day 5, I went from Eldon up to Ottumwa. And so starting at Eldon, I moved up towards the small town of Agency, actually going away from the river, trying to run into the site of Chief Wapello's grave at the Chief Wapello Memorial Park, which is just outside the town of Agency. Aside from the famed Sauk leader, Joseph M. Street, American Indian agent, is buried there as well. And after stopping there, I headed back, re-met the river just to the southeast of the Garrison Rock Resource Management Area, a natural area maintained by the Wapello County Board of Conservation. I wanted to go to that site because of the 1840 site of Fort Sanford, as well as there's a pioneer cemetery there, a place called Horse Thief Cave I was pretty interested in seeing, as well as just a lot of kind of interesting habitat for Iowa wildlife. After visiting Garrison Rock, I pushed on to the largest city I would encounter during Part 1 of my expedition across Iowa, and eventually made it to Ottumwa. And so come with me as we take a look at Part 1, Day 5. So I started my day at Eldon, moving away from the river up towards Agency, which is the site of the Sauk and Meskwaki Agency, during the 1830s, run by Joseph M. Street. And today this site celebrates Chief Wapello's Memorial Park. There's all sorts of signage to direct you there, all sorts of interpretation of the site, really well maintained, especially in contrast with the Black Hawk Memorial site I saw the day prior. At the site, Wapello is buried next to Joseph M. Street, who was his good friend. They toured the eastern United States together, where Wapello famously gave a speech in Boston talking about the need for better cooperation between indigenous peoples and Americans. There's also some other interpretive markers at the site about the agency, about the final treaties that moved the Sauk and Meskwaki out of Iowa. Initially, the Meskwaki obviously came back in 1857 to form the Tama settlement. But eventually I moved on from the site, heading back down towards the river. Did run into a train briefly, but that's how things go sometimes in Iowa. And as I headed back onto the floodplain, it was a relatively downhill journey. Heard some bullfrogs, saw a lot of people's places kind of along the river. Eventually I ended up at a small canoe access a few miles to the southeast of Garrison Rock Resource Management Area. And this is a small site, but I put the drone up there. Also, a couple of gentlemen were there fishing with explosives for catfish, which seemed like an odd approach to me, but I guess if it's allowed, do it, or don't, please. But eventually I left there, trudged up the road, saw some inundated early corn crops that were getting a little bit wet after all the consistent rain, but eventually ended up at the site of Fort Sanford, which was a United States military fort in the 1840s at Garrison Rock, up on the plateau. So Garrison Rock has huge sandstone outcroppings that you can see throughout the park. On the back side of where Fort Sanford was, there's this infamous place called Horse Thief Cave. Horse Thief Cave caved in about 50 years ago, so not recommended to try to go in there, but you can still see where it was, as well as many of these other outcroppings as you climb your way up towards this giant, broad prairie plateau that's maintained by Wapello County Conservation today. Wapello County Conservation is the second youngest conservation office when it comes to counties in the state of Iowa, so they're doing a lot of good work there. And the park itself is, I'll warn you if you're going there, the trails aren't incredibly well marked, so you might end up doing a little bushwhacking. I know I got caught in a couple of thorny kind of bushes. I made my way up, ran into a couple of dead ends on trails, but ultimately all's well that ends well, and I saw some incredible things within the Garrison Rock Resource Management Area. Truly a hidden gem when it comes to Iowa's natural areas, a place I only decided to go see because I was interested in Fort Sanford, but realized there's much more there, especially when it comes to habitat for Iowa's wildlife, as well as just kind of natural vegetative growth. Some of those kind of things really stood out to me. As you get to the top of the plateau, there's a giant U-shaped plateau, which on one end is the site of Fort Sanford. The other end is actually a pioneer cemetery from the 1800s. Now, you should not trespass into the area. It's barbed off. I use the extended zoom lens on my camera to be able to get a couple pictures and then headed on back down. And made my way to Ottumwa. And Ottumwa is the largest city I encountered during my travels during part one. And Ottumwa is a beautiful city. There are all sorts of wonderful buildings. The county seat of Wapello County has about 25,000 residents of the 2010 census. And one of the things that stood out to me is it straddles the Des Moines River, which immediately in my mind as an environmental historian, went, they have to have some massive flooding issues here over the course of their history, and that is undoubtedly true. But if you walk around, there are so many well-preserved and historically significant buildings, from the Wapello County Courthouse to the public library there, to just a ton of different buildings through downtown. And if you're somebody that really likes architectural history or just enjoys looking at old buildings, Ottumwa is a place you could spend a few days and really have a good time. Walking around down there, you do see some markers of kind of the flooding that's occurred there in the past. And I went and did a little digging, and there's been 10 events over flood stage in the last 10, 12 years in Ottumwa alone, let alone if you go deeper into the historical past. There have been some significant and dangerous floods that have taken place at Ottumwa, dating all the way back to the 1850s. And Ottumwa really kind of took off in conjunction with river traffic and the railroad, but got a huge boost from the coal industry that we're going to talk about more in the videos tomorrow, in particular when we visit Buxton. But Ottumwa really thrived as coal took off in south central Iowa during the second half of the 1800s. In the 1890s, Ottumwa opened the Coal Palace, which you may be familiar with. The Corn Palace is still in Mitchell, South Dakota. But Iowa had a rich tradition of different exhibition palaces like that, be it the Bluegrass Palace in Cresco, or the Corn Palaces of Sioux City, or my personal favorite, the Flax Palace of Forest City, Iowa, where I work. But Ottumwa eventually has continued to press on and continues to see a lot of these flooding events. The flood of 1993, the largest above flood stage recorded. But if you go today, there's a large hydroelectric dam and reservoir that helps to mitigate the effects of flooding. Now, it's not quite the size of the Red Rock Dam, which we'll see a few videos from now, but it was really interesting. You can go out on the kind of spillway, and I saw a pigeon nestled into above the turbulent spewing waters, and I thought it's incredible where you'll see wildlife in Iowa. And the dam, really helps to mitigate the effects of flooding on Ottumwa, and has helped to hopefully stabilize the environmental future for the community. Really great visit to Ottumwa. Enjoyed taking a look around the town, seeing what was going on in the downtown area. A lot of cool revitalization projects. There's a really cool coffee shop downtown, the old YWCA that has recently been put together, and just some other projects like that. So, part one, day 5, really interesting day, thinking about Chief Wapello and kind of the different paths that different indigenous leaders took when dealing with American colonization of the state of Iowa during our earliest years as a territory and a state. Also just very interesting in terms of Garrison Rock Resource Management area. I'd highly recommend taking a look at that if you're in the area. A very interesting site. And then also just great exploring Ottumwa, getting to know one of Iowa's kind of larger communities a little bit better. So I appreciate you taking the time to watch the video. I hope you'll reach out. As I am always saying, people make this project better every day. The feedback I get from different people or questions about things I could go into more depth with are helping me kind of refine the project as I move through the course of the summer walking across Iowa. Once I finish, I intend to make some other bigger kind of scope projects, and these questions and other research and things like that that you're willing to reach out with always are of great use to me. So if you got stuff, either get in the comments or feel free to send me a message via the website. I appreciate you following along the project, and I am really grateful you're coming along to explore Iowa with me. Thank you.
There's a lot of good history about Iowa a lot of people don't even know about.